Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Monster in My Closet. So Morgan, this week, are we scared or scary?
I'm scared, and you're scary. So let's get into that.
We'll unpack that. So today, in an episode that we are calling God of the Gaps, beware of the God of the Gaps lurking in your office. Unmask the illusions of magical thinking and uncover how neglecting the details can turn minor oversights into workplace nightmares and personal nightmares too. No pixie dust will save you. It's time to face the unknown with reason and strategy. So 3 big things we want to talk about today. First, we want to talk a little bit about the importance of critical thinking. So we want to discuss how critical thinking can bridge the gaps in workplace knowledge. Second, accountability and responsibility, and really talk about how taking responsibility for details ensures better outcomes, or the likelihood of better outcomes. And then the third thing is overcoming uncertainty. So we want to explore some strategies for managing uncertainty in business without resorting to wishful thinking. And as always, we are going to have dense notes, show notes that are going to be available. So you'll be able to see all of the great research that Morgan did and all of the nonsense that I put together. Morgan, why was this a topic that we wanted to delve into today?
Well, I was watching YouTube the other day, and Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about this concept of God of the Gaps when it comes to science versus religion, etc. And we'll put links and everything in the show notes so you can learn more about that from a scientific/religious perspective. But I thought to myself when I was listening to that we also do that in business, right? So wherever our knowledge ends, we do some magical thinking to say, that's okay, it'll happen, this is where the magic happens, and then the end, right? And now we're successful. So it's like, hey, we're gonna hit $1 million. How are we gonna do that? We're gonna fill the pipeline. Like, how are you gonna do that? It was like magic. People, sales quotas, right? So there's a lot of ambiguity about actually how you're going to make the thing happen. And I see that across all industries that I've worked in. So I thought this would be a good topic for us.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating topic. And that whole notion of not being clear about how you're going to get to where you need to go or the problem that you're really trying to solve. I think that's kind of interesting. And it's funny, when we were preparing for this episode, I was confused about the topic because I thought, I do that. Like I say things to the team that I am fortunate enough to work with that will burn the bridge when we get there. Like when they ask a question, if I'm not 100% sure about the answer or exactly how we're going to fill that gap or get that piece of information, I say that, well, like, let's put a pin in that conversation for right now, and we'll get to it as we get closer. I recognize that when we were preparing, I'm like, I'm actually a culprit of this to some extent. And my rationale is I don't want to get stuck in the minutia of trying to solve every problem before we launch something. But it does beg the question, like, how much do you need to have answers before you kind of push forward?
Yeah, I think so. I've worked with you, so I've seen this thing that you're describing.
Like, what the fuck is this?
So what I'm going to say is there there is a space for that, and it's really important. So when you think about you're doing something new, that new to you, or new as never been done before, you do have to get people aligned around a concept. At the highest level, you have to align around the concept first. And when you're aligning around conceptual thinking, the detailed thinking does get in the way, right? Like,
Yeah.
how exactly are we going to do this? And we're like, let's agree that that's where we want to go first before we start talking about how we're going to do it. So I think there's a place for both types of thinking. But
Fair.
where I see the failure in this process most of the times is that you say, don't worry, we're conceptualizing right now. We'll get to the details later, and then the later doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think the detailed piece needs to be a fast follow from the conceptual. So as soon as you get people aligned around a concept, you need to be picking a date when you're all going to talk again about the how it's going to get done.
So that's a great way to codify that or define that, because I do think that there's a clear delineation between
Mm.
I'm gonna I want to get let's get clear on the concept, and then let's get clear on the execution, and they're separate but important, and that you have to have both in order to be successful. So
Yeah.
how does this notion of relying on magic thinking hinder problem solving in the workplace? Where have you seen that, or what are some examples of that?
The best examples I have is way back from my data center days. I don't know, something about data centers in the 90s. There was a lot of magical thinking happening. And one of my favorite stories is the speed of light problem. So we were putting together all of these service level agreements for data restores at this place that I worked. And the executive said that 24 hours was a good SLA for a full restore of someone's data. I'm like, I mean, it sounds good, but let's do the math. I'm like, okay, so their offsite storage is in Argentina, and we're in the United States, and they have 5,000 terabyte of data, and it's gonna blah blah blah, and so it's going to take approximately 5 business days to move that data at the speed of light to Miami, right? So it's a speed of light problem. Like, you can want it to be 24 hours all day long, but it's never going to be 24 hours. And it's that kind of thinking. It's like it's super wishful thinking. Like, we got to be realistic, right? If they want to be able to restore their data in 24 hours, then we need a different backup solution than the one we're currently providing them, because it doesn't work. I think the other thing that I saw that was really interesting in data center 90s data centers is that this idea that it was okay just to take whatever system down on the weekend that you wanted because no one was working on the weekend. Well, I mean, okay. Do we not have global customers? Do we not have, businesses that run 24/7? You can't just like have a 5-hour maintenance window on a Saturday because that's what's convenient for you, right? So it was interesting, this kind of magical delusional thinking, like, oh, it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. Let's talk about how we can do it and make it better. So those are some of my examples. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I have similar examples because we're both old. Well, I'm old. You're experienced. So, I mean, definitely that whole notion of being able to get a thing done in an unrealistic amount of time. And I think from a personal standpoint, my wife has this this phrase. She says anneal time, right? Like, you're going to get that done in anneal time, because I have this concept that I'm going to be able to get like 42 things done in a day. And it's all of a sudden like, that's just not possible. Right. And so you have this conception of time that isn't realistic. And that's that whole notion of this quote unquote magic thinking. Like, I'm going to be able to get more done than is possible. And I think that's why there's like the going best practice is you really want to limit yourself to two things in a day or one thing in a day. And you're going to get that done. You're going to get it done really well and complete it all the way through. That
Mm.
if you extrapolate that into an organization, we talked about this in a previous episode. There's this really great book called Subtract. And maybe it's just great because I just finished reading it. So it's, recency.
Oh,
But this whole notion that you can't keep adding, right? In order to solve a problem, you've got to limit the scope. And that's part of this idea of magic thinking and why it's so important to get to a level of critical thinking that allows us to be able to solve a problem completely.
yeah, yeah. So I'm curious about that list of 40 some items. Like when you don't get them done, are you angry about it?
Sometimes I'm disappointed, right? Like,
Yeah.
not angry with myself. I'm disappointed. It's a shitty father thing to say. Like, I'm not angry at you. I'm disappointed. No, you're angry, right? You just don't want to say that or break things. Yeah, I mean, and I think that is that cumulative effect in an organization that occurs where it almost feels like, well, we don't get anything done because it's not that we don't get anything done. It's that we don't get the 42 things done daily on the to-do list that makes us believe that we're not getting things done. And it does get in the way of completing initiatives fully all the way through. So um, what do you think the role of accountability is in avoiding magical thinking? How does that align for you?
I think that we need to be, I think it's kind of habitual, this, thinking that like when you hit a problem, you have to have some kind of rigor in place that says, okay, we're brainstorming now, then we're going to get into the details. We're going to, let's say, identify critical path. And that's something I feel like I haven't seen for a while. I mean, back in the 90s, but I was running a PMO at the time, so it made sense, right? So identifying the critical path through an activity, like if nothing else gets done, these three things need to get done, or we have failed. And I don't see that thinking very much, that critical path thinking in projects these days. It's like, here's the 5 bajillion things we need to get done, go. Right. And 500 days into it, you're still working out the marketing collateral and like literally nothing else has been done. So it's like, what is the critical path that we need to go through? And you're just solving for the critical path items. And then everything else is kind of a nice but at least you've got through the critical path and you can say, we've had some success with this.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. And there's that move fast and break things mentality that I think permeates in or whether you're in that industry or whether that makes sense in the world that you live in or not. It is something that is readily apparent. And I think the notion of accountability to me is really important because you have to have someone that owns a set of outcomes or is responsible for a set of deliverables that can help to guide and put guardrails within the work that's being done. Because when you don't have that someone or that group of people that you can go to mediate decisions, what tends to happen is everything happens and nothing happens. So what I mean by that is you've got 5 people that are working on the same thing. And instead of that group kind of deciding or that person deciding, well, Morgan's going to be working on this, everybody continues to work on the same things and it never gets aligned. And so nothing seems to get completed. And the other thing is that you can't have somebody that takes ownership for whether something complete. You can't have ownership of being giving somebody recognition for a job well done, or celebrating a milestone, or any of those things. And I have so many examples of that in the last like 10 years, where it feels like you're just kind of running, and it's like, we're going to go west. Okay, everybody run. It's like, well, why are we running west? I'm not exactly, how far do I need to run? When do I take a break? When do I know that I've gotten to a place that I can act a minute? Should we be going west? Like, there's all that stuff that's kind of there in the background when you don't have accountability.
I think another interesting place where we do the God of the Gaps exercise is if you have a project that requires cross-departmental collaboration. Let's just play this out. Maybe there's one department or many that you don't get along with, or your key stakeholder in that department is difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
But your critical path is going directly through that department or individual to get you to the end goal. And I have seen quite a bit where you're in the planning phase and you get to that political thing, and like, well, Gary, then there's Gary. And you're like, well, we'll burn that bridge when we get to it, right?
Yeah.
To quote my good friend Anil. But the problem is you really are literally burning a bridge when you get to it, because you've not been strategic on how you're going to get Gary on side with you, or how you're going to navigate through that. And so then it becomes, once again, you're in a bottleneck. It becomes combative. You don't have strategies, interpersonal, interdepartmental strategies on how to get this done. You're just in the same mode you've always been in.
Yeah.
So I think it's particularly important where you have something that's going to be really sticky and unpleasant, that instead of like pushing that off and say, hey, let's do it differently this time. We've done it this other way all the other times, but now instead of just pretending this time it's going to be different, let's actually make a plan to make this time different.
Yeah, I think that is really that's really powerful. And one quick example that I'll share is, so, and I think I might have talked about this in other episodes, that we created this training package that was brand new for the organization that I currently work in, and had an idea for what's this thing going to look like, why is it important, and when it was done, what the outcomes were going to be. But all that other stuff in the middle, I hadn't really thought through. And it got done. It was painful because I did not make sure that I was thinking about what those things are. And the other piece that I think is really important for people to remember is, when you don't think of those things and you don't have a point of view about how they're going to come out, you lose your control of what the story is about them and how they're going to get done, because you have to hand that off to somebody else, or other people get involved. And so this notion of magical thinking, I'm actually learning something as we're talking about this, can slow things down a lot. So what are some of the things that we can suggest to listeners about managing uncertainty without resorting to wishful thinking?
Yeah. I think it's possible that some of our listeners may be thinking, well, this sounds like it's going to take a lot of time. Like, I got to think through every detail of how things are going to get done. I think that you can still be agile and go fast and cover the details. So if you think of the very best components of agile software development, okay, not the make-believe shit that people are doing these days on agile, where it's just go fast with no rules. But like if you look at the original agile methodology, I think that you can do that with a large-scale project like you were talking about, right? So you're conceptualizing, you get people on the same page with your concept, right? And then you're going critical milestone down the road, and you're handling in an agile manner where you're baking it, you're communicating it, you're making sure there's no holes in it, and you're rolling to the next thing. So, I mean, in some worlds they call this, building the road in front of the car, but at least you're building the road in front of the car. It only may be a few feet in front of you, but you're still building it, and you can still move fast, right? But I think it's kind of the discipline of making sure that the critical thinking aspects of the great idea happen.
Yeah, that is super smart. And that notion that you need to codify or have identified what are the critical paths in any large project, and then bring smart people together who have expertise in those critical paths. And once everybody's on board in terms of the concept, you can actually let people with guidance drive those critical paths, and you can move fast and still be able to cover the bases that you need to cover. I think the caveat I will say is that you want to have the critical paths in there, right? Not every path, right? Not all roads lead to Rome, just a handful of like, uh, and I guess I love talking about food. When you make a pizza, right? You want to put just enough cheese and ingredients on there that the pizza's good. If you have like pepperoni and sausage, great. If you have pepperoni, sausage, mushrooms, panzerotti, pineapple, cherries, right? Like once you get to a peanut butter of ingredients, like it's no longer pizza, it's garbage. So you want to have that critical path identified, but don't have too many things on that critical path so that you can continue to move fast. So
we are going to get some hateful listener comments about supreme pizzas in this episode. I can just feel it coming. Why are you eating on a supreme?
Yeah, bring it. Yeah, I'm a big believer in that, don't put fruit on a pizza, because if you do, I fucking hate you. Or maybe I don't hate you. I'm not sure you're the right person to be in my life. I don't know, but we can talk. We can talk about
I think we need to, because I've been recently had my mind changed on hot pineapple, like not as a fruit, but in a savory dish. And I was like, okay, this is all right.
Yeah, grilled pineapple, very good. Okay, so what are some things that people can do to create that critical thinking culture in a team? Anything in particular?
Well, I think just having a methodology that you follow. Hey, this is how we're going to roll. We're going to conceptualize. We're going to hit these critical items, and these are the dates we're going to do it. And I also think that this is a really good opportunity to look at the strengths of your team, identify individuals that love the details.
Yeah.
Love them. Like they're hardwired to get to a level of detail that to some people is frustrating. And this is where you're like, hey, I know you're into the detail and this is important to you. Would you like to lead the because you know every single thing will be thought of because that's the way that person rolls, and let people that are built that way do their thing, right? Yeah. And even if it's not their primary role on your team to do something, that people that are just wired to get to like the process detail and the execution detail, just let them do it. Just let them do it.
Yeah, I think, right, like having that methodology, bringing the right people together, and then making sure that you have buy-in from your leadership about the length of time it's going to take. Because, right, this whole notion of like packing 10 pounds of potatoes in a 2-pound sack, like that is modus operandi for many organizations that in the world, right? I think that's just the nature of the beast. Like, can you create a vaccine in 2 weeks? Well, usually it takes, 2 years. Well, but I need it in 2 weeks. Like that you're going to skip some steps to get there. So I think
I can get you a vaccine.
Right. You can get, I don't know what it's going to do. Third arm.
I'll take your money.
I can do anything in 2 weeks. But I think it's important, right? And I think the other thing that's really important is to notice or have some indicator when you are going into magical thinking, right? Like there's got to be somebody or something that you're doing to check yourself, right? To say, like, hey, are we trying to do too much? What's the unintended consequence of this? What happens if we do nothing? Like those kinds of, like, you got to have some questions to check, right? Like, are we trying to do Anil's list of 42 things? Or is this realistic to get done to solve our problem?
Yeah, I think there's a tool that you can use to think about whether or not something is doable or not, and if you've gotten enough detail, and that is try to explain it to someone. So if I think I have it figured out, I'll try to explain it to Anil, and if I stumble over myself and Anil asks hard questions and I don't have answers,
Yeah.
then I haven't really figured it out, right?
Yeah.
So I like to repeatedly explain it to people, whatever the it is, until which time I can explain it and they get it after the first explanation and they don't have questions. Or if they do have questions, I can answer them.
Yeah. That's a really smart way to do it, and it does both kind of clarifies the conceptual and begins to get at what are the critical paths that you need to solve, and what are the things that you're just not going to worry about, or you're not going to solve, right? So I think that's a really smart way to do it. So I feel a lot less scary because I now realize the impact that magical thinking has. Although I do have to admit, I still love it because I like to imagine that I'm going to get those 42 things crossed off my list, even though I know it's impossible.
It's useful. It can be useful because it does relieve stress, magical thinking, um, until you don't check off everything on that list, Anil, and then it's not so great.
No, it's not. Well, but I hope everybody feels a little less scared, a little more knowledgeable about how to overcome the gods of the gaps. And we thank you for listening to another episode of Monster in My Closet. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learned something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software as a service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.